Welcome back to the Global Business Report. Economic success is an objective across the entire human race, but while some continents have achieved prosperity, others have struggled. Despite its potential, Africa has historically experienced the latter, but experts at Geopoll say that is changing. One method governments use to measure and boost economic development in Sub-Saharan Africa is through the expansion of financial services. Money, money, money. Arise Business Correspondent Adefemi Akinsanya joins me for this analysis. Adefemi, you're welcome, you're welcome, you're welcome.
Hi, Rotis.
Shall we discuss financial services for the youth across Africa?
Let's get it started. I'm very, very excited.
All right. So first off, who is Geopoll?
Okay, so Geopoll are a leading market research center. What sets them apart from different areas and different market researchers is the fact that they use their abilities to gain access for research into areas that would otherwise be very difficult using traditional methods. An example of this is that in 2019, we know that Geopoll conducted 10 million surveys using mobile phones. So again, definitely a market researcher of the future. And what we're seeing here with the youth in Sub-Saharan Africa, it's some really interesting numbers. So I'm really eager to get to our next slide.
All right. Let's do that here and see what we are going to be starting with. So we're going to be starting with, I guess, profiling of the countries.
These countries.
Yes? Okay, cool. Here we go. So what do we got?
Great. So we start off here with looking at the types of respondents that Geopoll use in this survey, and we're categorizing them by age. So this graph shows the age demographics in 6 African nations, which are Ivory Coast or Côte d'Ivoire, Nigeria, Ghana, Tanzania, Uganda, and Kenya. Okay. And if we look at the colors, we know that the orange represents the older side of the demographic, people and respondents aged between 25 and 35. Okay. And then when we see the blue, we're talking about respondents aged between 18 and 24. Now, looking directly at the graph, one bar stands out, and that's Nigeria's blue bar. Okay. And that highlights the fact that there's a huge amount of youth in the country. 88% of respondents are reflective of that. And then if we put these numbers into context, we know that this isn't so much of a surprise because Nigeria is the most populous country on the continent. As we move across, we see that in Côte d'Ivoire and Ivory Coast, their demographic bubbles are very, very close to each other. But then in instances that we've seen in Tanzania, for example, it's very much the inverse of what we see in Nigeria, where they have a much older population within the groups of youth that they spoke to for this survey here.
Okay, we have the next slide. Okay, income streams. The money. How are they making their money?
Again, so they've divided it in between our orange bar, which shows non-consistent forms of income, and then your consistent forms of income in blue. So again, if we start at the top with Ivory Coast, we know that at 74%, there's a major amount of non-consistent income coming into the country. Definitely, this is highlighting the fact that there's lots of insecurity, uncertainty rather, when it comes to people being able to map out what they want to do with their funds. If there's no consistent stream of income, it's very difficult to do that. But then conversely, in Nigeria, 67% of respondents said that their income is consistent. They know where their money is coming from. It comes in regularly, and then that, as we'll see in our next slide, is probably a marker of the types of employment people have in terms of getting their money.
Interesting. All right, so I guess I'll pull up our next slide here.
Absolutely.
So the sources.
Exactly. This is the really interesting stuff. So at 43%, the highest type of income people have is from gainful employment. Right. And then naturally, there's an identical situation here where we've got self-employed, which is entrepreneurship and the like. And then you've got the bank of mom and dad at 34% equally. And if anything, it shows that people are able to fuel the bank of mom and dad
into entrepreneurship.
Absolutely. And then as we move into smaller subsections, we've got the 15% here that people earn from betting and gambling, which is,
that's very interesting.
You'd like to think that that is a hallmark of some type of economic prosperity because you have to have money even if you are going to lose it or gain it.
But it's so risky.
Very risky. Very risky. And then there's not much difference between these last two sections. Here in the blue, we've got sponsors. And then in the green, we have
others.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So again,
okay.
ultimately, what we are seeing here is that people are earning more from their gainful employment, but they're not so far behind as the bank of mom and dad and entrepreneurship.
Very interesting. And then the most popular savings choices?
Yeah, well, there's not much surprise here. We know that 35% of respondents feel comfortable keeping their savings in a bank account.
Okay.
Naturally, if you have regular income, if you are employed, it would go into a bank account anyway. So we're not too surprised about these numbers here. If we now move into mobile money, you'll see countries like Kenya contribute a lot to this because they're really putting a lot of effort into their technology, making sure that they can put those advances across the board, especially when it comes to financial services. So that, again, not so much of a surprise here.
Okay.
In the grey, though, the 12% is a marker of the savings group, which is different from a bank and also a hallmark, I guess, of the different types of demographics and how people feel comfortable saving their money. Then in 9%, we've got keeping cash in a safe place.
So like a pillow.
People should stop. It's not wise, but you can understand.
You know, in 2020, it is really amazing that we still have folks stuffing cash in a safe place.
It's a reflective of two things. One, a lack of economic prosperity. If you don't have access to a bank, there's no reason for you to have a bank account. And two, people like to keep their things, you know? Sometimes people like to keep their things.
But there's younger people, which is, again, we're still looking at 25 to 34.
We are looking at
18
youth.
Yeah,
absolutely.
youth. So it's some fascinating stuff. All right, and then let's see
then
now. Investment culture?
Exactly. So again, a big proportion of that number. Now we're looking back at countries. At 84%, Nigeria leads the way in terms of an investment culture. The fostering of that. And then that leads itself to kind of fly in the face of Nigeria's ease of doing business rankings. I think it's 131 out of 190 countries. Has been improving. As a whole, isn't the greatest number, but we can see that doesn't stop monies from being deployed into the youth and making sure that the investment culture in countries like Nigeria continues to grow. Closely followed behind Nigeria is Kenya. Then very close to each other, you've got the likes of Uganda in the yellow and Tanzania in the grey. And then we've got at 55%, Ghana, and then at 42%, you've got the Ivory Coast.
Do we still think that Nigeria's population is driving the first place rankings we're seeing there? Is it possibly?
I mean, if we go back, if we were to look back at the demographics graph, which we don't need to do, we saw that Nigeria's youth far outlies everybody else's. So I do think that is, you can see that connotation putting into the investment culture here. But then, if we also look at the types of income people have, that number that we saw of an identical figure between our self-employed respondents and people who are receiving money from their families, that also contributes to an investment culture that we're seeing in Nigeria.
Okay. And then what about the, I guess, the areas of investment? I think we're going to put that up there for folks to take a look at. So what did we see with regards to
Well, in regards to these countries, what's really interesting is that if we look at Nigeria, I don't know why we're so focused on Nigeria. It could be because, you know, inside the country.
That's where we are,
If we look at Nigeria, we can see that they haven't scored highest in any of these categories. So when we look at stock exchange, the buying of land, businesses, building real estate and farming, all of the other countries tend to perform better than Nigeria in these instances, despite, as we saw, the huge advantage Nigeria has in terms of its population. So that's really interesting to see. If we were to look at business, for example, I know the stock exchange is there. We know that Kenya and Tanzania are leading the way with 63% to Tanzania and 53% to Kenya. And you've got Nigeria lagging behind at around 34%. So it's all about using your advantages of population and investment to foster real life change.
Does the gambling number, does that the betting, does that bother you a bit? Because I'm a tad worried that came in fourth place back in that earlier slide that we're looking at as far as what they use for earning income.
Well, this is the thing. If we were looking at numbers of people losing money, you'd feel a little uncomfortable. But if people are gaining, you'd like to think that people know what they're talking about. Ultimately, we have to be aware that there is a lot of negativity surrounded funds when it comes to using gambling because it's, as you said, very high risk and then it puts people in danger.
I think the Kenyan government made some moves to try to reduce that with regards to access to betting because they were worried. But I think another thing with the betting thing is it's unknown as far as employment opportunities, and them saying, okay, well, look, I'm just going to put my chips in this gambling outfit and see if I can get some money. But the fact that 15% actually make enough of that really is interesting. Okay, the awareness campaigns by different governments in different countries, from your Nigerias to your Ghanas to your Ugandas, Tanzanias, and so on. Do you think that they are doing enough as far as advertising campaigns and marketing to the youth to say, hey, look, you folks should look at investing and investment culture? From what you've seen, I mean, like if you're on Instagram, do you see enough ads and so on?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, as you said, social media is definitely being used as a way of making sure that people become a lot more financially literate across the continent. But if we were to, again, looking at the main sources of income, people naturally will drive towards being able to finance their own projects by earning their own monies. That's why naturally and traditionally more people would get their income from gainful employment. As we know that there are huge disparities between the wealthy and the not so wealthy in countries like Nigeria, so naturally that would foster instances where you've got more entrepreneurship, people being able to perhaps take funds that they've earned from gambling and put those back into self-employed so that they can breed another generation of people who are able to create income that would generate, a prosperity as people get older.
I also wanted to ask you something else. Now, you did say earlier that the bank of mom and dad
in the gray here
can be funneled over to self-employment.
Absolutely.
However, and as we say in Nigeria, the angle, as we call it, what about the lack of employment opportunities causing some people to now go into self-employment? That is to say, if you can't find a job, okay, I'll start selling shoes or something like that.
Exactly, but then you need the capital to be able to do that. If in the instance you're able to leave gainful employment to go into self-employment, that route is clearer because the funds have been earned through employment. But ultimately, that's why I said the Bank of Mom and Dad, they usually go into funding, if we're talking about income and monies, into self-employed activity. In addition to that, the link between the Bank of Mom and Dad and employment would be nepotism, so it would be harder to quantify that with cash and income. So I think with this instance here, they're more like, that's probably why they are on a level playing field when we see it on this graph.
Adefemi, good stuff, really good insight. We need to start focusing more on what's been happening with the youth, because there's a lot of information we can get into. So Adefemi, I appreciate you coming in and giving us your insights on the financial services amongst the youth in a number of African countries.